Hello and welcome to the King Heroes Journey podcast. My name is Beth Martins. I'm curious, did anybody just hear that? Or maybe only I hear that? I'm still working out some bugs on my intro here, but nonetheless, welcome. I'm glad to have you here. If you are there in the chat on any of the forums that we're on, the platforms I should say that we're on, YouTube, this is my new channel. By the way, for people, yes, you heard it. Excellent. Okay, that's always good. Thank you so much for letting me know, Pacific Prospector. And some people have been messaging me looking for old videos. They go to my blog and notice that because of YouTube that it's not there. So a few different paths for the moment is to go to my podcast channels, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Anchor FM. Or Anchor FM I think is gone, but there's a whole long list, grocery list in the notes below this video of where you can find those podcasts. And that's where everything is showing up. So you can also hit the Rockfin button on my blog. Some people are saying they can listen to those, and so others are saying they can't, even though I've been removed from being able to upload and stream to that channel. So it's a little bit windy, but don't hesitate to reach out, and myself or my assistant might get back to you there. You can do that from bethmartins.com. And so the King Heroes Journey is a podcast that is dedicated to those strong souls, those rare, strong souls that are willing to get out and say the thing and to continue learning on their path, no matter what they have at stake. Because it's easy when you have nothing to lose to speak the truth. But when you have everything to lose, that is a completely different scenario. So it requires a lot of courage and a lot of character and personal fortitude. So having said that, today's guest is Justine Lalonde, who I will introduce and then bring her on. I've had the privilege of working with her for, I don't know exactly how many, maybe 2 to 4 years, more than 2, maybe less than 4. She's nodding her head in the backstage. That's good. And she's a Canadian-raised Montrealer who has obtained her MD from the University of Toronto and then went to Harvard to specialize in psychiatry. And while she was there, also attained her MBA from Harvard. So a very educated woman, let's say. And it was in 2020 then that we met, or after 2020 when the world went crazy and she saw the writing on the wall in her profession and wanted to train as a coach and to gain some more skills to be able to work with people. And that's how we started working together. And she's an apprentice for Journey Code now, training to train the coaches themselves. So that's been just amazing to work with her. She worked in clinical practice in the US and then worked in big pharma in Europe and in biotech in the US for a dozen years. As well as being disillusioned by this industry, as well as psychiatry, she returned to clinical practice in Montreal in 2019, where she works now in private practice as well. And hello, Mike New, nice to see you. Do join us in the chat if there's any questions as we go along. I'm going to bring Justine on now. Hello, Justine, welcome. So glad to have you here.
Well, thank you, Beth. Welcome. Welcome you too. And welcome to everyone who's listening. As this is my first time doing a podcast, I said to Beth, so I'm very
Yay! It's fantastic. Very brave. Yeah, my last interview was her first as well. So I seem to be, what does that make me, a virgin slayer or something? Yeah, there you go. Well, it's very brave, not only to come and do your first interview, but also to speak out on this subject that is kind of prickly. So I'll give just a little bit of background first and then turn it back to you about why I'm interested in this particularly now. And it's because somebody close to me was damaged by one of these psych meds. By the way, this is highly censorable. It is possible that I'll be taking this video down off of YouTube, but you will find it later on Rumble and X and Fakebook and Vigilante TV that tend not to censor me. They shadow ban, but don't give me strikes and punishments and put me in jail and that kind of thing. But so when my friend was going through this, it opened my eyes. I knew there was some weirdness out there, but I had no idea the extent of the damage. And then I was able to, walk in a close way with her and see that it is, it's it's madness. Actually, it's madness, in the field of mental health and just the imagination in myself of how many people are already suffering, and then they get into the throes of the chemical cure, so to speak. And it is not rare by any stretch of the imagination. If you go onto my Twitter these days, there's a lot of people posting. Just from one post of a little bit of outrage from myself, I discovered that this is a very big, well-known issue for a long time. People have been speaking out. So I consider myself just to be a voice in that choir of outrage at this time. But nonetheless, I think it's a very important message to get out around the reality of that. So welcome, Justine, once again. Is there anything else you'd like to say by way of introduction?
Well, I mean, I think you pointed out I am the archetypal overachiever for different reasons, and I could definitely speak to that. I mean, was very much, as we can say, drank the Kool-Aid and very much a believer in the medical model. Which I no longer am. So it's interesting for me to contrast my kind of like former self and where I am now. And in fact, one of my kind of heroes in this journey, also a young psychiatrist, you might have heard of, some of your watchers and followers might have heard of, Dr. Kelly Brogan. Similarly, very similar type of pathway in terms of going through medicine, going through the guild of psychiatry, and then undoing all that. So I can certainly speak to that, but I just wanted to point that out. It's not like I've been kind of on this awakened path for my career. In fact, for most of my younger life, I was very much believing in this system.
Right, as we all were, because that's what we were born and raised in. And I was raised by a family full of medical professionals. In my immediate family ended up going that direction too, with two sisters that have their own roles in the medical system. And I've got aunts and uncles that are doctors and medical administrators. And now I got cousins that are doctors. And has anyone gone down the road of psychiatry? Actually, my aunt has practiced what some might see to be more like psychiatry out of her general practice, because she noticed, and I actually credit her with having a lot of integrity around this, that people would come to her often chronically with the same issues over and over again and never really get helped. Now, there's other reasons why that was, but she would turn to counseling them, which you must know in that field, it's very expensive compared to having somebody come in for 5 to 7 minutes and write a script and have them go on. You can churn out, you do a lot of billing that way in a day's time. Whereas she was giving a whole hour to sit down and really talk with somebody and find out where their psychological problem, or the physical problems might lie in the psyche. So I thought that was incredibly good of her to do. Yeah. But still with the limitations. So yeah.
And also just want to speak to the fact that, I was very, very much involved in big pharma for a period of my career. So I know that from the inside. And, I've seen kind of the machinations, and, I have a very lucid view of that. And that also, we could speak to, kind of like how I approached the whole kind of pandemic period, because, I had that as prior experience. I know what it was like to be in big pharma, and so I was not. I was just kind of very awake to just the realities of all that.
Right, exactly. So let's go back to that moment where the world went bananas. I said this time there are a lot of metaphors for what happened, and where were you exactly at in that time when the pandemic hit?
So I had actually just resumed clinical practice, literally was like mid-December. So, really it was the beginning of January 2020 that I started up my new practice with a very idealized approach that we'll be speaking of. I wanted to help people deprescribe from their medications. I wanted to do psychotherapy with them, which I was doing. And I was actually billing using the provincial billing system here for that. And so I was dependent on payment from the government for that. But on the other hand, it also made it very accessible for people to access me, and then to, for them to do therapy with me and have great follow-up. Honestly, it was a gift offered to some of the people who I worked with. And so I got some early experience there, and that was going on in January, February, and March. I mean, from the beginning, I haven't really told this story, certainly not publicly to a lot of people, but, I was never, ever under the impression that there was an actual, real kind of deadly pandemic going on. It's not like I bought into it in any iota. So, and I immediately started kind of like, just very naively in some ways talking to colleagues about it. Like, come on, this is not such a big deal. Like, don't you remember SARS in 2003 in Toronto? Like, that turned out to be overblown. And it's like, at the worst, it's going to be the same thing. And really, that was my initial reaction. And I was really stunned by my colleagues' initial reactions, how they were very much taken in fear. And at the clinic I was working at, because I was kind of like a freelance physician doing my thing, but, taking billing through the government, but I'm not an employee of anyone. And at the clinic I was working at, so I'd show up once a week to see patients on a Friday. And most of the physicians, it was like a ghost town. Most of the physicians weren't showing up and seeing patients. I was the only one. I was like, I might have been one of maybe two of us which actually show up and see patients, and the others were just afraid. So I continued to see patients, and there was no kind of specific measures other than, just, using common sense, I guess. And then at one point in the summer of 2020, the government mandated that we had to wear masks everywhere, indoors, like all the time. And I was a big squash player. I was really pissed about that. But so at my clinic, when my clinic, they were like, okay, well, this is, the new mandates coming down from the government. I immediately told them, well, if that's going to be mandated for me to see my patients, like, I'm not interested. I'm just not going to. I'll just leave. Thank you very much. And they're like, no, don't leave. Whatever you do behind closed doors, that's your business. So, the clinic wanted me to stay. And so I did, still for a little while. And I invite clients into my office, and I'd be like, you could take your mask off, because actually, and I encourage you to, because I really do need to see your face, and I do need to see your expression for me to evaluate you. And most of them would have a sigh of relief. And on occasion, I'd have a young patient, usually in university age, who would be petrified. So I just noticed that. And so I continued seeing patients. I ended up doing a lot of telemedicine, which ended up being interesting, just in terms of serving more people and just having that flexibility. And I continued until September 2021, as some might recall, the writing was on the wall, the vaccine was out, and the rollout was coming. Oh,
quick, poison jab and boogeyman virus. We had to come up with other words for that, just in case. Yeah,
I'm not used to the podcast world, so
I didn't warn you properly. Yeah, no problem at all. Yeah, once is usually fine, but if it's repeated, then it gets flagged.
Okay, got it. And so come September 21, the writing was on the wall that the healthcare professionals would be asked to participate. And if we did not go along with the program, we were basically threatened to have our license removed ASAP, given 3 weeks notice. And all onus was on us to ensure that our patients had proper follow-up, so they said. So, it was clear to me that I was therefore going to walk away from that. I was not going to participate under duress. And I said that to each and every one of my patients in person. And so many of them were shocked. One, surprised in my decision, interested, also like, oh, why are you making this decision? And shocked that the government was, for the most part, imposing this. Because I told them, had it not been for that imposition, I would not necessarily be taking this drastic move and removing myself from their care at this stage. But it had come to that. And just to make that story complete, it ended up being an empty threat. So at the end of the day, no licenses were removed. But by then they had made it so real that basically it'd be almost reckless of not taking measures as I had. So I did. So I stopped practicing for about a year and a half. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, so you're no stranger to standing up right from the get-go. That's amazing.
Yeah, well, push come to shove, I realized that I was willing to walk away and not be pushed into that direction. And I also have a license to practice in the US, so I kind of I was just kind of thinking like, oh, okay, well, there are alternatives in life, so. Yeah.
You had options. Yeah, that's good. Good for you. That's amazing. Yeah, and those empty threats they're amazing. It can be wonderful to stand up and call what can be a bluff, because they have needs, and they have needs for practitioners, right? That if you're only one of two that's showing up of an entire team, then they are clearly at a disadvantage, and you have leverage because you got the skills.
Right.
So well played.
Yeah, I don't think it was the physicians as a group standing up. It was more healthcare providers and those lower on the totem pole, so to speak. And they realized they were going to be having about 15% of the workforce missing in certain hospitals. Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that we're supposedly overrun. Can you corroborate that, by the way, that there really wasn't much going on when they said the hospitals were so...
I cannot corroborate more than anyone else in terms of...
Okay.
I was not really in those places.
Okay, got it. Yeah. And getting some props there from Pacific Prospector. All right. And so then was it before that you got red pilled somehow? Do you want to just take us back to that moment when you realized that things weren't exactly as they appeared to be?
Yeah, I guess that would go back for me to 2007 when I came across a documentary on 9/11, and that was a very that's another one.
Another one, but not. It's okay once, just not to say it over and over. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it definitely made me kind of I had a lot of cognitive dissonance around that for a little while, because I was still very much steeped in that kind of worldview. So I just couldn't figure it out. And I remained kind of obsessed and kept thinking, okay, well, somehow, some new political figure is going to come on the scene and be a savior and expose all this. And I kind of eventually came to the conclusion, no, that was not going to happen. But that would be kind of the beginning of a turning point of some sorts. But in terms of a medical turning point, well, there was one that actually occurred around the similar time. I did receive an inoculation as part of my kind of requirements, and I was injured. I developed a Bell's palsy, which is paralysis of your face, for a good 3 months. So you're kind of drooling, can't quite speak properly. It's kind of a little embarrassing, and you're like, I hope this is not going to be permanent. And for the most part resolved. There's still some residual in my face. Most people can't notice it. I do, but that was such a kind of a striking experience for me. I called it in immediately to the pharmaceutical company that was the manufacturer of that product. And they're like, oh yeah, well, thank you for calling. Yes, we're aware of this. Yes, we'll document this. And please call us back if you want to give us any update. And that's pretty much it. And I was like, okay. And I was already part of that industry. So I was like, all right, so these things happen, and I got on with it. And, as I said, it kind of resolved. But then there was, in 2016, there was a documentary that came out that was all slated for the Tribeca Film Festival. And it spoke of a certain fraud going on in the pharmaceutical industries pertaining to certain products, injectables in young children, and as may relate to a certain risk of autism. And I have to say, again, I was very much brainwashed, and I thought, why is Robert De Niro mixing himself up with this business? And but the fact that it got such it got banned, and that documentary, and there was like this like big fanfare about, oh, people shouldn't watch this, it's dangerous to watch this. I mean, bad publicity is good publicity. Like I want to watch it, and after watching it, it was a big wake up call for me. And I went down that path of really doing my own research, and there was no turning back at that point. And again, naively, as some of us experience, particularly as healthcare professionals, I was like, oh, well, now that I have this information, I'll call my daughter's school, and I'll call the public health officials here locally, and I'll make sure that they're all aware of all these risks.
And how did they respond? How did they like that?
Oh, for the most part, non-response. If any response, a little quizzical, like, what are you talking about? Who are you? Not hostile, just a lot of like non-response and quizzical responses, but really getting nowhere. So, and then I started to realize, oh, this is a field that no one wants to hear about.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you're almost always dealing with, if you want to call it the class of people, is the bureaucracy. And bureaucracy doesn't know at the heart what's going on. They're kind of on an assembly line, and they put their little piece in the machine, and then it goes on to someone else to put their little piece. So nobody really has an understanding of what's going on. And then it's really left field. This might sound very trite, but we have a traffic psyop going on in the city where they want to make sure you can't really get anywhere in a decent amount of time. And I want to yell at construction workers. They're cutting. They're making a mess on our bridge that was under construction for more than 3 years already, and it finally opened at the end of the summer last year. And now they got it closed back down to 2 lanes. And I want to, honestly, I'm doing my inner work every time I go, okay, don't yell at the workers. Don't, it's because they're just the machine, right? They have no choice about what's happening, and so that's the sad reality of it. And that class tends to hold the most. I'm not sure if that's accurate even to call them bureaucrats, but the cogs in the machine. They have no power over the machine. Can definitely include bureaucrats. All right. So now in your private practice, hello, Anne, nice to see you. I'm glad we've got some of the fellow Journey Code students and graduates showing up. Yeah, who know Justine, know and love Justine very well. Hello, Learning Time. Nice to see you. Happy Moon Day as well. And then, so what was it like to be a psychiatrist and be prescribing what are called psych meds? And maybe let's back it up to the first question. How do you even define a psych med?
How would I define a psych med? They're called psychotropics. And for the most part, I would put in that basket any drug that is like, okay, for the most part, developed or brought to the market with the idea of having an impact on the brain or the nervous system. But there are some other ones that aren't designed with that intent, but they nonetheless get through the blood-brain barrier as we know it, and have potentially some impact. So for example, like there's a long-standing blood pressure pill it's a beta blocker called propranolol. Some of you might have taken it. Inderal is its trade name. And take that every day, and it's well known. And even when I was a medical student back in the 90s, it's well known that, that will cause depression. So, or as some kind of, some form of central nervous system depressant. I'm not exactly sure how it does that, but it's just to say, because that one's known to go across the blood-brain barrier, whereas some other alternatives for blood pressure, for example, don't. But I would stick to psychotropics, but those could include those from neurology, so all the kind of anticonvulsant epileptics, as well as those targeting psychiatric, conditions and pain. So
Right. Yeah. Never mind the pain meds, right? It is a huge, huge world. And when I first started getting into the conversation on Twitter, people were sharing drug names left, right, and center. And it seems like there's a million of them. Is there a number that you could even say, or is that a hard one to like
Oh,
even
that's a
just?
hard one. I wish I had my little book with me that I refer to, but probably because like going way back, right? And so you can still, well, certainly hundreds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just to put it in perspective there.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting just personally. I've been on 2 medications that I wondered about, and even though they're not considered necessarily psych meds, they certainly do affect the nervous system and the brain and your experience. One was as a child. I was saying before we got on today that I was often put on Gravol by my parents because I got car sick. And they didn't want me barfing all over the back of their seat when I was traveling. They traveled a lot with us as children. And then so I looked it up recently, and it is a combination of a sedative and an amphetamine, a stimulant, and then a third ingredient. I'd have to just look that up quickly. And would that qualify that it's affecting the central nervous system? And like a sedative is to knock
Yeah.
you out. That's got to be a CNS, correct?
Yeah. And amphetamines or some form of some kind of amphetamine. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. There you go. So I was already on psych meds for car sickness because I had an erratic driver for a dad at the time. Right? Like that's
You can
nuts.
treat the root cause, but no. No.
Right. Exactly. And I just, like, as a kid, I'm like, yeah, anything to stop the barfing. That sounds right to me too. Even now, just to foreshadow a little bit of what we're going to talk about later, how that response of wanting to get sick is very much related to the fear of not surviving. Right, the 2 of us talk programs. We'll get more into that, and so that could have very well been part of it too, but there was no knowledge about how to deal with that. And they were like, "Oh, be quiet, or we'll give you something to cry about." Was more a response there. And then the second one was Zopiclone for sleep, because I had incredibly severe insomnia that was just untouchable by anything. I did finally unravel and figure it out, and only with total lucidity this year do I understand that insomnia at a totally different level. For me, it's mostly about copper poisoning that leaves you wired tired, does not let your nervous system rest at all. And so I end up on this crazy medication that it had the effect of knocking me what seemed to be unconscious for 6 hours, but it turned out I could break through that. And when I broke through it, I would feel psychotic. Like, say it would allow my body to get up and do something. I might do something weird, or I might do something that with my normal social filters I would never do. And, so it was because most people would just be out cold. I had this power to be awake. It was some kind of like super strange superpower. And Zopiclone is really gross. And then to come off it was totally hallucinogenic.
Yes.
And I didn't sleep for 6 entire weeks. And every time I would just barely slip into a sleep, it would go delirium. It would go nightmares. I would wake up terrified. So that to me speaks also of a psych med of sorts, at least, certainly affecting.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, that is one of the categories. It's in the Z's for sleep, but the benzos and its associated cousins like Zopiclone for sleep. And yeah, there are they can be some of the worst. So we'll talk about that. But when Zopiclone came to market, it was sold to psychiatrists, but also all physicians as the non-dependent forming, the non-problematic, short-acting, types of these category of medicines to help with sleep. And turns out it was all but the opposite. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that we've learned, we're jumping around here, and I'll try to get back on track, but I've learned this phrase, duration paradox. And from what I can tell, most of the drugs are tested in a short duration.
Yeah.
And that's when they work, right? Like, so I take the little blue pill, and I go to sleep and I'm like, miracle. And, and it's better than having gone without deep sleep for many, many years and learning to function from a kind of miraculous place. Thank God for release work, because that's how I've survived coming off of it. But it, what was it? Where was I going to go with that? Too many thoughts at
Well,
one time.
just the short term.
That's it. The duration paradox. Exactly. So they're studied and tested, and all the claims are made based on those short-term studies that show those miraculous results at the outset, and they don't reflect the fact that they all stop working in one way or another. Like for me, it was that it wasn't ironclad. I could still break through on the sleep side, and then I started getting sick, and I was actually very aware that my liver was very toxic, and it was not safe for me to keep taking it, even though I was told that I would probably have to be on it for the rest of my life, which is often a message that is received and given. And but yeah, I was very clear that it had made me incredibly toxic, and I couldn't go on. So I was in a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. And that the fact that they are studied and marketed based on short term, and particularly actually for sleep meds, like really short term, like 2 weeks, yeah, that is the industry standard in psychiatry, and we could talk about antidepressants and just the body of literature around that. So in many ways, physicians are kind of like trained on that body of information. And I told you, I worked in the belly of the beast, and there's a reason for that. That's the gold standard. Once it's the standard, you just kind of adhere to it. No one wants to move the goalpost, and the FDA is kind of like, well, we'll talk to FDA because it's not Health Canada. It's really the FDA. So it's all about the FDA, and if the FDA accepts that, then we're good to go. We do not want to do one thing more than what is expected. That is true. That is one truism I learned through my passage in Big Pharma, is they want to take zero risk in exposing any risks on any of their medications. Even though from a humanity point of view, that's not the right approach. And certainly from even a business point of view, you think like, maybe you kind of want to know the full risk profile. Like, that's the standard.
Right. Well, this is the thing about the duration paradox. And I'm referencing the work of Garrett Smith now, who I might, by the way, have on my stream tomorrow, because he got a strike, his channel's down, and I might host him for his live stream, just so everybody knows, because I have a selfish want to talk to him all the time. And that duration paradox is like a hypnotic effect. When you get the first good result, whether it's from a drug or from a drug-like effect of a supplement or an herb or any of those kind of like concoctions that are badly defined even these days, not really herbal, not really chemical, not considered pharmaceutical, but not natural. And then natural itself is not good, but you get brainwashed by the good result at the beginning. And you hold on to that, and you establish a belief in your own psyche that it worked. And so when you start to get evidence that it's not working, you still have the belief that it's working.
Yeah.
And so you don't think to look to that thing as now a cause of, it could be another problem or even the same problem. And this is what I'm noticing with so many of the stated and published side effects, that they actually, like, you take a medication for depression, and one of the side effects is depression.
Yes. It's very insidious, and it's very insidious for physicians. And I was there, I told you, because before waking up to all this, once you start to see it, you can't unsee it. But before you see it, you don't. And because the most common response of people trying to get off of all these different medications, such as the one that you named, or antidepressants, is, oh my God, my anxiety back, my insomnia is back, my depression's back. And the response you hear from experts is, well, therefore you need this medication. No, it's actually being caused by the medication. Boom. Certainly by withdrawal, and if not actually by the medication in some circumstances. So exactly. Very insidious, very insidious.
Exactly. That's what I started to see when my friend was trying to come off the medication, and then the instant message was like, oh, your condition came back. That's why you need more,
Yeah.
right?
I was trained that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. There you go. There you go. I'll just say hello to a few people who have come in the chat. Hello, Karina. Nice to have you live on a show as well. And same lady, you figured out how gross Zolpicone is, so it's really yuck, awful. And nice to see you, Voice of Reason. We'll be talking later. And said, yeah, Zolpicone has been horrific beyond words. Sorry to hear that. And same lady thought it was in the clonazepam family. Hello, Tammy. Nice to see you. My favorite truthers. And Phoenix Rising said, if you look in the CPS, there are numerous side effects that you will need a medical dictionary to decipher, is the other part of it, right? That's one of the reasons I'm very grateful for Garrett to be able to decipher some of those things for myself that I could never have read in the medical literature or understood with any hope. And yeah, so what do you consider, if there's, would you say that all of them are dangerous? And which are the most dangerous, say, of the psych meds?
Well, they're all dangerous to the extent that they all have some documentation of at least withdrawal effect. Okay, so if we speak of, like, that's the main danger that I warn people of, but there are other dangers that we can speak of as well in terms of side effects, which is different from withdrawal effects. And but probably what I've come to see as most dangerous, and I would never myself want to take, and I've warned, close friends and family members, do not take these, are the vast majority of antidepressants, which are ubiquitously prescribed. Yeah. There's one antidepressant, I don't even want to name it because it's not like to promote it, but I find that's kind of unique in its class, and it's like the least harmful. All the others, I'm like, yeah, take at your own risk, and we can talk about the risks. And honestly, people come and consult me because they're on these, and some of them consult with me because they have horrific side effects, but mostly horrific withdrawal effects. And some of them come and see me because they want to take it, and I'll give them the litany of like hidden, possible side effects. And they'll still be like, well, I'll take my chances. It's an interesting mindset. But in terms of also I just want to echo what you said, is I do say that to people. It's like, be careful, because if you take some of these medications, like it might actually have an effect initially. I'm not even sure if it's a beneficial pharmaceutical effect. It's more like a numbing type of effect, right? And then what happens is you experience what you name as relief, because it's relief from what you experience as your anxiety, as your emotions, as your depression. And yeah, you attribute it to the medication. And I'm like, you got to know this stuff is, if it does anything, it's going to do that. And please take that moment to learn to swim, do some coaching, some releasing, just some breath work, something. Because this is a short-term approach, and it is at no ways addressing any underlying issue. And at most, after 3 months, you really should be reevaluating whether or not you should be stopping it. So that's kind of like my my warning if you actually are really intent on taking this stuff, which some people are. But if you can, best to avoid it. So to answer your question, I did name, I'd say the class of antidepressants I see as most problematic, and close to that would be the benzodiazepine family. The clonazepams, the zolpicones of the world can be very horrific to get off of.
Oh, there you go. I didn't even know I was on a benzodiazepine.
Well, it's in that family. Yeah.
Right. Got it. And I want to just echo the point that you're making there, that this is the problem, that people want to be happy and feel good. And because people are mostly having experienced pain in their life, suffering, that some suffering is maybe necessary and normal, and there's suffering through growing and expanding and failing, which is good because that helps you to be successful at some point. But because we are chronically in pain, and especially psychic, mental, emotional pain, then we consider feeling good is equal to feeling numb. Not feeling has become better than that pain.
That is very true. I see that. And especially in the short term. After a while, though, people do come in and say to me, I, I'm not liking living like this, because they're not feeling the full range of the palette that you would normally feel.
Well, that's exactly it. That in fact, being numb, or what I would also call apathy on the scale of emotion that you're very aware of, is the biggest pain of all.
Hmm.
The biggest pain. It's the biggest drain of energy. And yeah, that's hell. That's being between the worlds and not living at all.
Hmm.
I just want to respond to a few of the comments here that Accidental Alchemist said, by the time you're on 3 meds, no one really knows if you're having a side effect or new symptoms or what's going on. And that's very true in the natural health world too, where you're on 65 supplements and you feel bad and you have no way of knowing which one is it, or you feel better and then you're like, oh, what worked? I don't know.
Hmm.
Right. When I was being treated for cancer, I was on 100 things at one time and there was absolutely no biofeedback possible because it was just such an onslaught. Um, Diane, welcome. Nice to see you. Yes, you know it to be 100% true. You lived it. You tried to stop depression meds just to be worse than I had been prior to starting the meds. This is the tragedy. And doc tells you now you need them for life, and you chose to wean them yourself off without your doctor's support. That's amazing. Good for you, Diane. That's it takes a lot of strength to do that. I don't know if you want to comment there at all.
Well, it's not an unusual situation, unfortunately, Diana was found herself in, where you essentially are left to your own. And yeah, good on Diane, because you have to have that inner fortitude to go on that path. And some do, and some don't, because they're discouraged and they don't have the support. And some of them, honestly, it gets so bad, I don't know how it's doable without support. And those are more exceptions, than the rule. But you just don't know if you're going to be in that boat, that more extreme.
Exactly. And can we spell it out why a doctor couldn't support her in that? It seems to go without saying, but what would that require? Right? Because that would be an obvious place to continue support, but they can't. So do you want to talk about why?
Oh well, the way I see it is they just don't believe it. They just don't believe. They really fundamentally see you as broken and in need of this stuff. So it goes against their view of the world, that they would be aiding you and helping you get off of this. It's knowledge they don't have. It's not part of their worldview. That's the best I can say, because I don't. Yeah, and also I'll tell you, it's tough. It's tough to help someone get off of this. And the reality is, a lot of doctors, when it starts getting tough, they're not around.
Right, right. Because I think I'm not sure if I can articulate exactly what I'm saying, but at some point you will start to reflect on your own recommendations, your own,
Yeah.
you told someone to take this, they're having this terrible experience, and you will start to feel your culpability in the process.
Yeah.
And that's something that's a can of worms, right? That as soon as you open that door, that where is the responsibility and to continue supporting somebody who's been injured by your recommendation, even though you had no intention for that, right? Like, it's not you certainly weren't trying to harm by any means, and I say you by any psychiatrist out there, but that would have to come into play,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yes,
And
for sure. That's the cognitive dissonance, particularly if you're at the beginning of that process. But at any point in that process, yeah, it's not a fun or somewhat painful thing to know that you've contributed, potentially by initiating that, if that's the case, and the person is now struggling with that. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. That's very intense, but can be done. Redemption is possible. And I'm sorry about your sister, saying lady. There's a question here from Banzo Beans, which sounds kind of like a pharmaceutical all by itself, but I doubt it is. He says, or they say, I'm currently stuck on a low dose escitalopram due to
Mm-hmm.
strong withdrawal symptoms. Your hope withdrawals will become less severe after a long-term detox. Do you know anything about this in that direction?
Mm-hmm. Um, it makes sense. I can't point to like a body of work or experience on my part in terms of long-term detox, but it does make sense that particularly escitalopram is probably the most commonly prescribed antidepressant. So I encountered it a lot, and therefore you encounter a lot of problems with it. Now there's a good number of people who, knock on wood, don't have problems with it, but a good number do, and it is very commonly prescribed. So I do think following Dr. Garrett Smith's approach makes sense from a detox point of view, but also what is documented is probably what has already been done in this question is like, gradually get yourself really off of this really low dose. And it sometimes will just take a lot of patience, months, sometimes years for people. And then
Right.
once you actually stop it, I say this because I don't want to be discouraging. It's mainly meant as an encouraging message, but it could still be months of some hellish landscape in terms of anxiety and depression until you start getting out of the woods. And this is once you stop it. That's really the real threshold, is stopping them. You could be at low dose and kind of managing. It's really going off of them is where your brain really starts to reel from the withdrawal. But I'm accompanying currently, and I have accompanied people getting off of escitalopram, and it can be really, really, really challenging. And it's not specific to that molecule. It's not even the worst, but it's just the most commonly prescribed. So I encounter it a fair amount.
Oh, thank you for that. I appreciate that. And Diane said it took her a year, but she feels more alive today than ever. Congratulations. That's amazing. So good and hopeful for others. And Pacific Prospector said that the symptoms can take months or even years. So is what I'm hearing as well, what you just said. And why does a significant minority experience side effects and withdrawals like brain zaps and dysfunction? This is exactly my next question. So it would seem that not every single person experiences either side effects or withdrawal symptoms. Is that true? Some people can take this and not have that?
It appears to be true, and it does surprise me too.
Right.
I'd still say like I won't say 100% because not everyone will say that, but like I'll say to people, 80 if not 90% of people will experience emotional numbing, and that becomes a real problem after a while. That does not go away. And then the sexual side effects, will impact people depending on their sexuality differently. For some people, their sexuality is not an issue in their life, so that kind of like interference is not a problem. But I'd say 80% of people, there seems to be 20% of people are like, well, I don't notice any change. But there's also a really unusual, relatively uncommon. I've encountered it, I think, once in my life, in my recent career, of what's called kind of a post withdrawal, kind of like sexual stimulation syndrome, where because the serotonin system is so key to our sexual functioning, our genitals basically functioning, getting like responding to some brain activity, that it doesn't turn off. For some people, they are kind of permanently in a kind of like very sensitive, if not to say kind of sexually stimulated way, which is actually it might sound kind of like funky, but it's not fun. It's really bad, and it seems to go on indefinitely. So, and this has actually recently been added to many monographs. These are like these product profiles that accompany the medication so that doctors can read it. And that's been recently added, except for the FDA. They're holding out. They hadn't put it in their monographs, but in Health Canada, it's in European Medical Agency. They've added it. So these are, like I was saying, relatively more newly recognized because they're more infrequent. But nonetheless, for full kind of informed consent before getting on these medications, you want to know, oh, there's a rare possibility, but that can be you. And it ruins your life. Not just that side effect. I mean, there are many others that can really be life ruining. And I, I don't say that to scare people, but that's just the truth of it. So.
Right, exactly. So that's one of the hopes with this stream today, is that if somebody's considering using a psych med, and maybe they're getting encouraged to do that by family or by a practitioner or something like that, that just to put the message out, you are signing up for an incredible hardship, one way or the other. It might be 20% chance it's not even going to work for you. This brought up one. Yeah, right. And then, but are there people that won't experience like negative side effects and withdrawal? Are there some people who go off it with no consequence whatsoever?
Yes, I have seen that.
Okay, wow. Yeah. It seems like a given, but I wonder what the factors are. Is it a question of toxicity, existing toxicity already that they have? Do you have any guess about that?
It's a good question. I do wonder myself. I also find it interesting, those who are prone to some of these more unusual side effects, why some of it is pharmacogenetics. So some of it's the way you metabolize through your liver and your liver enzyme, production of enzymes that break down these chemicals. So that's kind of a straightforward known thing, but what you do about it afterwards, you're still kind of left with the bad consequences. Like, I'll just tell you a couple of them that I came across recently. I did not even know this was even possible, but I did my research, and like Garrett Smith has shown us, you do your research, you learn, oh, you can get addicted to carrots. By the way, that was me. I didn't know that was a thing. Turns out. So yeah, I had 2 patients come and see me in the last 12 months with having a lot of difficulty passing urine, just like their bladder, just like, they just couldn't pee as a result of being on something like escitalopram, and they literally looked pregnant. And I was like, oh, I did not realize this is a potential side effect. Of course, researched it. Yes, there are documented cases of this. And one of the patients told me, oh, my urologist told me this is a common side effect. I'm like, well, that's interesting to hear that from another physician who's a urologist, who, of course, would see these cases. But I'm a psychiatrist who's like looking for this type of stuff, and I didn't even know it.
There you go.
So why those people are prone to that to have that side effect with their bladder, I don't know, because I haven't really come across it that much. And same goes with the brain. So obviously some brains are much more sensitive to this stuff in terms of getting off of it. Some people don't have to be on it very long to experience some pretty bad withdrawals. And I personally had a personal experience, not me personally, but someone very close to me. It took one dose of one of these medications for sleep. And had horrific akathisia, which is a very specific term for a very specific side effect, is where you experience some really very disturbing internal restlessness. It's as if you need to keep pacing and pacing. You lay down and you just have this incredible urge to keep your legs moving and your limbs moving. And the way it was described to me by this loved one was worse than the worst cancer pain that he had had. And, that's speaking about something. And I witnessed it. And I can't explain why that happened for that individual, but he also very sensitive to zolpidem. So there's something about brain sensitivity in certain individuals. And he'd also received chemotherapy. There's this notion of chemo brain afterwards, that your brain can be a little bit more sensitive or to certain of these pharmaceuticals. So yeah, there's a lot of factors that are not understood, but potentially play into why. And you mentioned, well, we went on this riff talking about toxicity to start with, probably.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's why I'm a canary in the coal mine, because I've been poisoned to the nines, and there's a lot of like little edges that I have. And, I was in my friend's car and he just had some essential oil hanging from the mirror. And it's definitely not natural. Even a natural one could be toxic, but it's absolutely not natural. And by the time we get there, an hour and 15-minute drive, and I can feel the effects of it just being in the same car with that. And it's like, throw it out the window, you know, trying to be polite and not say that. But yeah, that's lots of us out there. I have one question. I'm just curious, a little behind the scenes here, because I don't know psychiatrist life as much. We were sent to them as children, you know, when we acted out or we had problems or something like that, or I wouldn't eat. There was a time where I refused to eat, and then they would just send us to a psychiatrist. And then, do psychiatrists ever use placebos knowingly?
Not of my generation, and just so people know, I graduated med school in '96, so not of my generation. Maybe generations prior, there might have been some of that usage, but not of my generation nor the generations since. So no, but I mean, I've heard it raised on a couple occasions. Why not? So.
Right. Yeah, such an interesting thing. A lot of people in the natural health world talk about the placebo effect. And then I think there are a certain number of people, and I get them put my hand up here, where placebos don't work on me. Right. It doesn't matter if I believe in something. That doesn't mean it's going to work. I've believed in lots of things that didn't work. And the other way around, I've had no belief in something and it did have a good effect. So yeah, I was just curious if there's any of that, and then maybe behind the scenes people would be using those kind of techniques with placebos, but not institutional from the sound of it. There's no plan on that. Yeah. A lot of ethics would come up around that, because you'd literally have to lie to someone.
But what is very interesting is, like, having worked in pharma, I mean, the placebo is part of all these clinical trials, and and so, for example. You mentioned, 20% of people won't even benefit from antidepressant. No, it's actually a lot higher than that. At least 50, if not 60%, will not benefit. But, the pharmaceutical industry gets the claim, but we're superior to placebo, because, 55% of people will benefit from placebo, but 60% or whatever, or let's just say those figures, 60% will benefit from an antidepressant. So the actual difference is 5%. So you can see the placebo effect very, very clearly. And a rational question would be, wow, why doesn't the pharmaceutical industry want to investigate? Well, clearly you're not going to ask that industry, but why wouldn't physicians or society be interested in investigating that placebo effect, which is driving the bulk of even pharmaceutical effect? So so the placebo effect is there, but like you say, it's not for everyone. I mean, clearly, but it is very present, and you see it very present in these clinical trials.
Okay, very good. Thank you for that. Could we talk about antipsychotics in particular? Because there's, they got the anti-anxieties and the antidepressants, and then the antipsychotics. And I was told that the antipsychotics can be the worst of the drugs, although you're reflecting it's more, you consider the antidepressants to be more dangerous. What is, first of all, what do you, like, because I don't work with people who are maybe clinically psychotic or have received that diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And so that's something that when it comes to choosing clients to work with and people that I say would qualify even for a training like Journey Code and what's required there. So if they didn't have some basic control over their mental faculty, ability to, work with and navigate emotions, and not lose their marbles or whatever, I don't know, even know how to describe the effects of it, then I don't feel qualified or even attracted to working with them. Doesn't mean they shouldn't be helped. It doesn't mean that maybe coaches that I train would specialize in those areas. But what do you think is happening for somebody when it's that severe that they get the diagnosis of psychotic?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's clear, from my point of view, it's clearly a mixed bag. So in terms of I can't give a simple answer that would apply to everyone, and that's already important to point out. And I too also still have a lot of reservations regarding psychosis, particularly certain forms of it, that resemble a classic schizophrenia type of clinical picture. Like, what exactly is going on there? And again, it's not going to be the same for everyone, but I don't want to be dismissive, certainly, of that experience and how terrifying and horrific it can be for some individuals, and how difficult it can be to kind of get a handle on. So, what's going on there is it can be a combination of, well, sleep deprivation that kind of plays into some kind of mood stability. It can be a combination of intake of certain drugs, like we see increasingly cannabis, particularly in younger people. It's not the cannabis of back in my youth in the 80s. And there are certain kind of like, I'll say like kind of like spiritually related psychotic cases I've come across, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, but it does seem to be somewhat different than others where that does not seem to be at play. And then there are some that clearly there's like a big family history, and there's a vulnerability there for some sort of brain wiring that makes you vulnerable to that. It's not a given. You can, the same family have individuals who have schizophrenia and others who are just fine. But there seems to be something there as well.
And what are the actual signs that would give that diagnosis? I know there's some classic like hearing voices,
yes.
where that's, we all have voices in our head, but we don't have someone telling us that we're a crappy person, we should go and do something wrong. That's
right.
It's more.
Right. Yeah. So it's the quality of the voice too that you're speaking to, very derogatory type of voice. Those are kind of, from my experience, but also described as being quite classically associated with kind of the typical textbook case of schizophrenia, for example. Now, so when you meet someone who has auditory voices and they're not derogatory, that's already unusual. And then so it makes you think, as a clinician who's kind of been trained and met with a lot of people with auditory hallucinations, oh, what's going on? So that's already a little different. And also some hallucinations are more visual. I have a person who comes to mind who's like that, and it's almost I almost qualify it, my best way of describing it, it's almost like geometric, or very kind of object-based, and it's almost neurologic. And if you have visual hallucinations, like, I would be very, I think I'd be remiss not to think of like a neurological condition. Is there some kind of antibody-driven thing going on, a toxicity going on, a mold thing going on, an epilepsy thing going on that is creating that? Because that's not like the derogatory auditory voices that you describe as a hallucination. That's a phenomenon that's well known just to be, more associated with psychiatric conditions, particularly, namely schizophrenia-like. But all those other types of hallucinations, it really points to, you should really look into other, underlying factors that could explain that. But oftentimes that's overlooked. So there's that. And then and when we speak of psychosis, for the most part, we don't really speak of hallucinations. A lot of people will have psychosis without hallucinations, and that we're talking about delusions. So we're talking about believing things that are not true, and yet, despite being provided evidence that are not true, you still persist in believing them, and oftentimes can be bizarre, or if not bizarre, a paranoid nature, and often accompanied with like ideas of reference is the technical term. Like, you feel like songs are written for you, billboards are messages for you. You look at social media and it's like, oh my God, why am I getting this message through this platform? Those would be examples of different types of delusions. I mean, there's a whole slew of different delusions, flavors of them, but that kind of captures a broad array. And so most people have psychosis, have some severity on that spectrum of thought disorder, which it's also technically called a thought disorder. It's the delusions. So yeah.
Right. And you talked about like one of those poignant things where the self-doubt is exponentially higher is maybe one, because everybody has self-doubt, right? Unless you're fully realized being, then, and I don't know if it's 100% true, but I did hear that self-doubt is the very last thing to be let go of before total freedom. And but this, so is it just a matter of degree? Everybody's got self-doubt, but is it just that it's so believed in, like you say, that even say contrary to evidence,
Yeah.
that they still continue to entertain the doubts? Is it just a matter of degree, or is there something different there?
Beth, I just wouldn't use the word doubt when I talk about delusions, because it's actually almost the opposite. It's like they're lacking the faculty of doubting. And in fact, if someone who's psychotic actually has faculty of doubt left, I call that insights. Like, oh, maybe I reserved the possibility that this is not 100% true. That's good. Yeah, it's when, I'm 100% convinced that, an exorcism has been performed on me and I'm living the consequences or something like that. Or there's some other kind of idea that they cannot let go of, and you can bring proof to them or reassurance, and it's just nothing will touch that. So.
Right. So
So
interesting.
you're asking about antipsychotics, if you want me just to say a few words about that.
Sure. And I just wanted to say the reason I was kind of snickering earlier is when you talked about, delusions and believing what's not true, and ideas of references that messages are just for you. Well, you're describing the whole new age world, right? Like they turn on a song and, oh, it's meant to be. I got that exact message. That must be the answer because that was for me. And right, like that's a common rhetoric in that world. And I'm just making fun of that. So yeah.
Well, and also the world of so-called conspiracies, and also those who do not believe, and namely physicians who question some of the foundations of the pandemic, or taken to be evaluated psychiatrically. Exactly. I do not know of any cases, but it's not like I have extensive knowledge here of psychiatry. There's a certain qualitative experience of psychosis. Like you can interview someone and they can entertain unusual ideas, and they're not psychotic. Like it's really a degree of how you're experiencing that. If they're terrified of these beliefs, like that starts to play into the psychosis. So I like to believe that some people during the pandemic who did not believe everything and was questioning it, namely some physicians who were hauled in front of for psychiatric evaluations, would not have been found to have been, kind of impaired, but I don't know that for a fact.
Right. Got it. And would, I think there's a name, I'm not up on these names, but dissociative disorder and, just MPD, what the heck is that?
Multiple personality disorder and dissociative identity disorder are the same thing. They're just different names for the same thing.
Oh, okay. And are they considered a form of psychosis? Is that under that umbrella? They're not. Oh, okay. What umbrella would they be under?
A dissociative disorder.
Ah, okay. Very different. Got it. Yeah.
I kind of see them on the spectrum of some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder personally, in terms of there's a lot of controversy in psychiatry. That's like traditional psychiatry milieus of the validity of this, but that's because there's been a lot of psychiatry has not been very interested in post-traumatic stress disorder. It's really taken a while for them to get up to speed. When I was training, barely mentioned, rarely studied. In fact, it took a psychiatrist at Harvard, Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote this book that now everyone's heard about, The Body Keeps Score. But, when I was at Harvard doing my psychiatric training, like he was ridiculed. He was like, oh, this kind of like crazy kook of our colleague is like looking into PTSD and making these hypotheses. Well, now, he's on every podcast. Everyone is familiar with his book. And, so some physicians who step out of line in terms of mainstream thought will be ostracized. And that happened with David Healy in terms of a lot of these psychiatric withdrawal effects and side effects. And he's a Cambridge, UK Cambridge psychiatrist who spoke out, kind of naively in a way of like, hey, just kind of warning my colleagues, like, this is not all kind of like good stuff here, and got blackballed, and still to this day. And I remember as a young physician, like, he was pointed out as like, a bad apple, right? So.
Interesting. Yeah. And you've now lived to see the history of that play out. And speaking of history, I didn't prepare you for this question, so no worries if there's not, you can't say too much about it now, but how did it come about? So, Sigmund Freud is known to be the first psychoanalyst or psychiatrist. I guess those are fairly the same, are they not?
Psychoanalyst and what?
And psychiatrist.
No, not really.
Not really.
You can be a psychoanalyst without having an MD or.
Okay, got it. And so where do you think the whole field of psychiatry, psychoanalysis, and psychology came up? Say from a conspiracy perspective, I've heard things like that, they created the damage, and then they created the people who were appearing to help mitigate the damage, but they were really there to, keep people stuck, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Is there truth in that in your research or experience, or is there any way to know?
I think one historical kind of like kind of narrative which makes sense to me is that historically physicians, psychiatrists among physicians, in order to have like a respectable kind of position or status among other physicians, kind of needed to have fancy theories to be relying on and explaining their raison d'etre themselves. Like, well, why do we need a psychiatrist? And that eventually did evolve into more this kind of biological psychiatry, right, which is all kind of about brain chemistry and very reductionist and very pharmaceutically driven. And I think till this day it still plays a big important role because psychiatrists identify a lot with that. So we're talking about really my colleagues in terms of the Guild of Psychiatry. I mean, psychiatric medications go well beyond psychiatry. It's like family medicine and so forth. But we're just talking about psychiatry. So I do think there's something about kind of like establishing a certain social status among other physicians. And so that goes way back to like Freud's day, and even before that, where they really kind of wanted to make their mark in that academic world. And so it was kind of basically a play of egos, like Pasteur and others.
There you go. Also, the history of crazy. Sorry to use that word. I know it can be politically incorrect, but there were women still in an insane asylum that were there because of they were masturbating. They were caught masturbating, and then they were put in an asylum because that was in that day considered to be a sign of crazy, or other things like that. So that in and of itself, did you want to comment on that at all? Like the definition of crazy, right?
Well, what's fascinating about the history of psychiatry, and it is a fun history to read, is also these waves of different kind of manifestations of, let's say, psychiatric distress or distress of the psyche. So there's periods of hysteria, which was mostly associated with women, but not only, but also a lot of what you no longer see today is what was called conversion disorder, and that would affect mostly men. And a lot you see it like in those World War I and II era, where these men would like just go blind, but you can tell they weren't blind because various tests would prove that they're not blind, but they would experience themselves as blind. And that would be an example of a conversion disorder. Or all of a sudden you lose the function of an arm, or you couldn't walk. That would be a conversion disorder. That would be more commonly seen in men, but it's a form of hysteria. I'm just using these old terms, that this is how they were categorized. So it's interesting that you just don't see that anymore. So now you see more of other manifestations of psychiatric dis-ease that are kind of like more societally acceptable and so forth. So it kind of like morphs with time as well. And so and then you have the experts who get to make naming these things and becoming the expert and so forth. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I hadn't considered that side of it. Let's see. So yeah, you were going to talk about the just antipsychotic
Yeah,
medications
because
in
I hadn't
particular.
mentioned them before, and they are increasingly, I shouldn't even say increasingly, they are a class that are kind of like almost ubiquitously prescribed now. It's not just reserved as was in the day for kind of those who were affected or dealing with some form of psychosis. And yeah, they're dangerous in the long term for sure. And even, in the short term, and physicians actually are trained on antipsychotics because they do produce permanent brain damage. And so you can get these movement disorders that kind of look like chorea, which is like you're constantly moving and you're unaware of it, but it's constant for the rest of your life. And usually that does occur after years of taking these medications, usually at higher doses and usually with the older forms of medications. But it's been since documented still with the more newer marketed medications to still have that liability. So that's not good, clearly. But what was largely ignored and still is to this day is a lot of the side effects with antidepressants, including the withdrawal syndrome. So that's why I see those as like the more problematic ones, because in many ways, physicians are actually well trained on the real downsides of antipsychotics. Certainly in my training, I mean, that was definitely emphasized. So there's that. But yeah, there are real dangers and risks that are specific to antipsychotics.
Right. One tiny little anecdote. My friend's psychiatrist said that she'd never heard of that before. My friend reported how incredibly hellish it's been to come off. Oh, I've never heard of that. Never heard of withdrawal. And is
Yeah,
that even possible, or is that just like the deepest denial that you
that
can
is
imagine?
entirely possible.
Right. Right.
Unfortunately, that a lot of
Yeah.
physicians are like, never heard of this, coming off of particularly antidepressants, coming off of even antipsychotics. Maybe certain physicians can feign. But yeah, I guess just to answer your question, I would not be surprised to hear a number of physicians say, I've never heard of this.
Right. Right. Yeah. What a shocker that is, eh?
Yeah.
And in general, what kind of compounds are being used? Like, what's the biochemistry of those medications that shut down your? Is it shutting down your central nervous system to a degree, or like how do they manage to target the feelings to numb those out?
Mm-hmm.
Say with antidepressants.
So how it basically works is the vast majority, I'll say antidepressants, but it's similar to like those Z-class benzodiazepines, zolpidem of the world. So they target a certain receptor. That's how they're kind of designed by pharmaceutical companies. So we're targeting a serotonin receptor. And we're targeting particularly like the serotonin reuptake. So your brain kind of like releases serotonin on a regular and just reuptakes it, not wasting it. It's like a little vacuum cleaner. That's how it's kind of like the metaphorical kind of view of things. So the idea would be that these medications kind of block that effect. So it kind of maintains a higher amount of serotonin that's hanging around and available to do its thing. And but the thing is, like, every molecule has it's kind of like what's called its secondary effects. Like, oh, that wasn't really the target effect. So we got our target effect, but there's also all these other effects that this molecule is doing. So every molecule is chemically different and can be chemically hitting like, a dozen other receptors. It's not targeted to do that. It just kind of happens. And we know that in pharmaceutical industry, and we can like document that, but it's like, oh, that's secondary, it's like, but that actually could be the major cause of a lot of these withdrawal effects. It could be. Nonetheless, since they all seem to have a similar profile, particularly serotonin reuptake inhibitors and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitors, it's the same thing. It just kind of maintains, it kind of resets the amount of serotonin you have available, but it'll just reset it. And then your brain's going to be like, oh, I got a new reset. So I'm going to down-regulate. I'm going to produce fewer of these receptors so that I can kind of bring it back down to its like norm. And so then the brain, so at first the brain is like getting like, it's like a foreign intervention. And so there is this increase in serotonin. Maybe that's what you experience as numbness, or maybe some may describe as, because I'm not them, maybe some would describe as like, oh, a good feeling. But your brain will compensate. That's what the body does. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to now modulate and produce less of these receptors, since clearly, I got too much going on. And then when you come to take away the medication, then your body has produced a lot less of what you normally was there. And that seems to be our current leading hypothesis to what's getting you into this kind of biologic trouble of withdrawal. And so some people seem to be able to like upregulate pretty quickly, and others not so much. And could that be a toxicity factor? Can that be an inherent kind of like how you just create your own neurotransmitter and receptors, an epigenetic factor? Yeah, so there's probably a lot of variables there, but that explains it in a nutshell in terms of how these medications work. Some of them are more like the anticonvulsants. They're more like just trying to calm things down in the sense of like the flux of electricity going through. They're not so much messing around with neurotransmitters, but they're still kind of blocking these so-called receptors. And therefore I can only postulate, my understanding is that you would then have a down regulation of these as well, because the brain, the body will just adapt. So having worked in the pharmaceutical industry, I worked closely with a lot of basic neuroscientists. And I realized that I thought we knew a lot more about neuroscience. And now I realize, in fact, that we know very little. We know a lot about like certain very, very kind of like small stuff, but in terms of like putting it all together, forget it. I mean, so whenever I read kind of neuroscience articles that seem to give the impression that neuroscientists really have a grasp on what's really going on, like we're still the beginnings of like really understanding this brain and how it all pieces together. So that's, I guess, another caveat. I do say that to patients, like, don't believe that, science has got this figured out, because that's not the case. And I spent like close to a decade in the pharmaceutical industry working closely with these bench scientists to realize how little we actually know. And, they can build whole dissertations and PhDs on one little topic, but in terms of, actually brain functioning,
Not so much. Yeah. It's so incredibly complex and situationally dependent, and so I can understand why there's not much you can know. On the biochemistry side of things, I think is that what you're saying, more on the micro, like where they're able to see, chain reactions, or not chain reactions. Darn it, this is not my field, but
they can grow cell cultures, and they're good at expressing certain receptors and doing that kind of like fancy science. But to leap to actually understanding how the brain is functioning in an actual human, like it's a huge leap. Like, as far as I'm concerned, like I've really come across, rarely if ever come across an actual decent synthesis of like brain functioning, of neuroscience. I mean, the public seems to think that there's like these huge kind of like vast knowledge of how our brains are functioning, but it's more of these like kind of petri dish types of, or maybe mouse models. I think we figured out the mouse pretty well in certain rat species. No, it's true.
Oh yes, exactly. Yeah, we know them really well. We kind of are them. Yeah, so interesting. Maybe I'll go back to a few of the comments before I head on with my questions. We're going to change little directions. And Diane said, "I wonder if it's poisoning the brain," and that sounds pretty true to me.
I wonder if psychosis is also partially poisoning of the brain. Oh, as a result of brain poisoning is psychosis, I guess is what she's saying. Yeah, I wonder the same thing. Like I was saying, like I see it as a very mixed bag, multifactorial, or each individual having kind of a set of circumstances leading to that. Yeah.
Right. I've observed for myself, and this is actually a good segue into the next topic, is that when people are really sick, and I've been there myself. Those of you that don't know, I've been on my deathbed. 25 years ago, was diagnosed with a stage 4 lymphoma. I got poison to the nines as part of that so-called cure after all the natural health stuff failed miserably. And then so I've been aware of how the state of the body, of course, affects the state of the mind and the emotions. That almost seems stupid to point out because everybody's all like, yeah, of course I know that. But it's been something that I've been able to observe in my own, because I do this work day in and day out, the study of the emotions and the programming underneath it, and can see how when my body, when my liver especially is struggling to detox, and that's the whole body. You can't break out the liver. It just happens to be called the liver for a really important reason. And then how much more difficult the mental, emotional, spiritual work becomes because of the toxicity. I witnessed the passing of my father at 75 years old, and he was sick a lot, and then finally his liver was overtaken with cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And the personality change was incredible. He went into what you're describing as psychoses, the paranoia, the sense that, oh, the medical professionals are breaking into my room to do bad things to me every day and or every night when I'm trying to sleep, and the delusions and the beliefs and very derogatory messages you could hear him communicating inward and outward as well. And to me, now I just feel like it's clear as day that was the breakdown of the liver that sent the mental, because he wasn't like that his whole life by any stretch. It was like a, whoa, what's going on here
Mm-hmm.
kind of moment. And maybe the seeds of it were all there too. But that seems to be, and I've got a colleague I won't name that came after me for some reason I'd never met and never interacted with and never interviewed. But for some reason, as soon as I start interviewing Garrett, he starts attacking me and showing up on my own stream and the interview that Garrett did of me to try to take me down and out. And I've seen him change in a kind of psychotic way, that he went from seeming to be somewhat stable and normal person with information, and then he became vitriolic and bitter and attacking and all of this kind of thing. So I just personally can't help but see the toxicity of the liver really profoundly influencing the state of mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you when we say toxicity of the liver is just toxicity of the system, and the liver is kind of like the end point in terms of how to cope with that toxicity. But well, I'll confess, Dr. Garrett Smith really had me reconsider that hypothesis, and I think it's very valid, and I've spoken to some patients about it, and I've been doing a little bit more blood work testing on certain patients, and sometimes you don't need to have like clearly elevated, let's say, liver enzymes, but if you do, that's like a red flag, right? Something's already amiss, but you don't have to have that to necessarily have some toxicity. So I've been doing that more on my patients, and I particularly those who speak of like chronic fatigue or brain fog. I can see sometimes in my clinic we do some cognitive screening, some pretty 45-minute kind of tests, and you could see some impairment there, and if it's lifelong, yeah. So and I've been increasingly also been following those. I'm not sure if people are aware, but there's this at least relatively, it's not that new, but it's just getting more traction, notion that the diet can really enhance your kind of mental well-being, and without that, you could try all sorts of medications, and well, we've already talked about some of those limitations, but get nowhere. And so I've been saying that to most people who come and see me, in terms of just simplifying the diet, making sure that if they can, to increase their red meat intake, that really is the optimum source of food in terms of brain health, but body health, but brain health, and that's now been documented. And I can name like, oh, this psychiatrist is at Harvard, this psychiatrist is at Stanford, and makes people feel better, but just to have it backed up and in books. But yeah, and I think one can postulate, oh, is that also as a result of, by de facto detoxing as well, just changing your diet in that respect. So I do very frequently mention that. And when I got on this whole, change of heart in regards to psychiatry, I have this book right here. I mentioned Kelly Brogan in the beginning. This book, A Mind of Your Own, is what really got me going. And I was using this with my patients initially back in 2020 when the world went crazy. And basically, her main thesis or approach is also dietary based and very much detox based. And so those who are able to hear my recommendation, and I, take recommendations from Kelly's program. I did Kelly's program myself just to know kind of what it's like and so forth. So it approaches some of Garrett's work. It's not exactly it, but it's the same thing, being very cognizant of what could be causing toxification in you and so forth. I think Kelly has since evolved as well since that book, but it's a good kind of foundation. That's where I started and was trying to help people deprescribe, those who were open to that approach, or not even getting on prescriptions, even better. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I was just picking up on one thing that you said around deficiencies, because those are the main causes of disease that I can see now. It's toxicities and deficiencies.
Mm-hmm.
And to the degree that people are starving, maybe they have food and they have calories, but they don't have basic nutrients, essential nutrients, and the madness that creates. Right.
Yeah. So that's one thing I've definitely, even before, kind of getting onto Dr. Smith's approach, certain supplements, which is not necessarily those of Dr. Garrett, but some of them, yes, like zinc and selenium and magnesium. I will definitely speak to people. Like, you definitely need to have that at least, for a few months as of now, to see if that makes a dent and a difference for you, because sometimes it can be a relatively, I wouldn't say simple fix, but like an important piece of the puzzle. And that's where I see the red meat as comprising of many micronutrients that would be helpful in that regard. So
exactly. And enough protein, because a lot of people are getting convinced to eat less protein. I know that was the propaganda for me growing up, and why I ended up vegetarian, that we get too much protein and it stops your body from metabolizing calcium, was the big story that it took in and propagated. And that, it makes such a big difference just getting enough protein. I mean, it's so relaxing to the body.
A lot of people still say to me today, they're like, well, I asked them about their dietary habits. They're like, well, I don't eat a lot of red meat. I've they've taken in that message. I'm like,
exactly.
Well, can I ask you to consider increasing that?
Right. Oh, that must be crazy to be in that. I want to go back to a question that came up before we go too far ahead of it. And so any comments regarding Peter, how would you say, Gertze? Okay. Oh, very good. From the Nordic Cochrane Center, and his criticisms of pharmapsychiatry industry starting around 2010.
He's definitely a hero of sorts. He's definitely a stands strong for the truth and objective science, and just looking at he hasn't stood up just regarding psychiatric medications, but also, let's say, mammograms. He got a lot of flack for that. Very interesting work there. I do think I'm not going to get into his whole story. You can read about him. It's fascinating. And he was ousted by the Cochrane Collaborative, which is interesting because when I was growing up as a young psychiatrist, as a freshly minted physician in the kind of really early 2000s, that's when I completed my training, was in 2000. The Cochrane Collaborative or Cochrane set of publications and journals were viewed as like the pinnacle of objectivity, high-minded science, trustworthy science. And what's fascinating is that basically that whole organism got co-opted. largely through pharma. And having been in pharma, I definitely see how that happens. Like, it's not like, oh, let's take them down. It's more like, let's infiltrate, let's influence, let's like, it's all this internal marketing scheming. And that's what happened. And Gertz was just one of those uncorruptibles, but unfortunately, the rest of the organization did get corrupted, mainly through leadership. And so he got ousted. And that, what became particularly problematic was his position on certain mega blockbuster psychiatric medications. But like I was saying, he was also kind of outspoken on some other products. So, or devices or protocols, medical protocols. But he himself is a physician. So, yeah.
Very good. My goodness, you are a wealth of knowledge, Justine. It's crazy. Yeah.
I've read a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, you're extremely well educated. It's wonderful. Let's see, just so we make it through our own topics, and then I'll come back to some more questions in the chat there. And just to talk about how can people avoid getting to this place where they are either convinced that they need a psychiatric med of some kind, whether it's antidepressant, anti-anxiety, antipsychotic. How could they stay out of that place? And I want to also talk about consent, how from what I'm hearing, a lot of people are medicated without their proper consent. So again, how to avoid getting to that place where you lose the ability to choose what goes in your body. So where do you want to begin with that? Like, you know what I'm a broken record about.
Yeah. Well, we've been doing that together, releasing and so forth, for sure. There's a certain adage, or people are ready when they're ready. So I have come to that humble conclusion, and I also take my own path as an example of that. There's no point trying to save everyone, or somehow get everyone on the same path if they're not ready to take that path. And so I've had to kind of like water down my idealism. So I've come to accept that more, but I definitely always like to test and find out, where are people at? Where are they ready to hear? And I, to the best of my abilities, want to at least transmit the message. Be very wary about psychiatric medications. This notion that they're correcting anything, any imbalance, completely false. I would be hard pressed to find any psychiatrist at this point today that can really justify that position. Apparently some still do, but I don't think there's any foundation now to justify that. And there's increasingly sources that you can turn to that are psychiatrists. So if that's like of kind of a source of credibility or something to rely on, like I guess myself, just by experience, but they're critical of psychiatry. There's a movement called, critical psychiatry, of psychiatrists, particularly out of the UK. There's a little bit more of those voices there. But I would say, in terms of your comment of informed consent, you're not going to get informed consent in the medical system. It's not that they're avoiding giving it to you. Either they're lacking time, but for the most part, they're just lacking the knowledge. But
sometimes the consent is what I'm hearing, anecdotally at least. They were forced an injection, like some medical.
Oh, against basically involuntary or coerced, is essentially what you're saying.
Right, that can be, yeah. That they and maybe that is the consequence of letting yourself get out of control and acting out and doing something that was so extreme that someone took control of you. Yeah. And then, and they don't need your consent to sedate you or to whatever the case is, put you on a med.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of bad stories that people have experienced, and some of it, like you say, the reality is like, some people have contributed to that by being very aggressive for whatever reason, and it can be induced by some of these substances. And sometimes the system is also out of control too. There's this big kind of power play. Psychiatric hospitalization often ends up being one of the most traumatic experiences for people. Not always, but that's not an infrequent story and narrative. And having been in those places, I know how sometimes I can go horrifically sideways and be a bad experience for people. I guess, I did premise it by saying you're ready when you're ready, because some people will go down that path, and that's just, that's just kind of the way we are in society right now. I would say to people, like, there are some sources that I turn to for information, or I point patients to, because I don't have hours and hours to spend with everyone. And maybe I'll make my own kind of like a library of videos or whatever one day, but it hasn't happened yet. So there is a YouTube channel, a Dr. Joseph, so his YouTube channel is called Dr. Dr. Joseph, Josef, and he's all about basically withdrawal. So he'll speak to, and he'll also speak to some of the actual side effect, hidden side effects to a lot of these medications, all the psychotropics. So and he has a lot of videos and a lot of interviews of individuals who are, their experiences, their harms, as well as some experts, some psychiatrists as well. So it's an interesting channel, a lot of information there that's accessible there and hasn't been taken down. So, speaks to that. And then there's David Healy, I mentioned before, that was kind of like that blackball, but he's kind of continued nonetheless. So that's his name is Healy, Healy. And he, for those of you who are very interested in the topic of risks and withdrawal from the psychotropics, he created a compendium and an organization called RX Risk. So RXISK, as in risk, but with a little X between the R and the I.
Can you drop that in the chat by chance? I actually am connected with that Dr. Joseph. I'm pretty sure it's the same one. It's Taper Clinic on X.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. So if anyone needs to or wants to click on that, they can do that in the chat as well. And I've been watching his posts. They're very good, and he's clearly focused on this exact topic.
And he has a similar background to mine. He worked in pharma. He worked for the FDA. So, kind of knows. I think it's an interesting experience to have worked there, because I'm 100% disillusioned. I know exactly what that's all about. Whereas a lot of physicians who have just done clinical practice, like, that still remains a black box, and you don't really know what's going on in that world. So I posted. Did that come through?
In the private chat, so I'll just drop it in the public one here.
Yeah, so it's I just put in risk.org, which is where I went to when I was initially learning more about these side effects and documenting them and getting some resources for some rare ones. Also think Kelly Brogan's book is a good reference for people.
Very good. Yeah, I reached out to Kelly for an interview. I haven't heard back from her, but I probably just have to try harder.
Yeah, I'm not so sure that's her bandwagon anymore. Like, she's kind of moved on.
Okay. Okay. So. Yeah, maybe it's not a big focus for her. Yeah, because she does help people taper off medication. Is that something that you would also do if someone came to you wanting to get off their medication? And then back to the topic of readiness, right? That there's a lot of ways, and this is for me personally in my coaching practice. If somebody comes to work with me, if they just want to work on personal issues, and you're also certified as a coach in this system of Journey Code, then I will assess to some degree. But say somebody wants to then train themselves to be a coach of others, where they're going to be using the tools of deprogramming to help people make a transformation. Most people aren't ready.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry to say that, because we don't have the training in our background. We don't have the natural inclination or the circumstances in our life that pushed us to that point. And it's not a given that you're going to really, truly go inside when you're in trouble. There's lots of ways to avoid that and support for not doing that. So, I've had people come and try to sign up for Journey Code, and then I'm getting much more discriminating, and it's not because I'm a snob. It's not that at all. I just don't want people to be frustrated and struggling in a deep end that they're not actually ready for. And how did they get ready? It's mostly by their own internal decision, and then undoing the effects of the numbness that has overcome society in one way or another. How we've had to, out of self-protection, stop being in touch with our feelings. And, like the Love Your Liver work for me referencing Garrett Smith's work, as we have done often so far, is humbling, because I realized how much of my own physicality I had to suppress just to get by in daily life. Right, because I do have a damaged liver. I'm very lucid and clear about that now. And then I'm waking up to, oh, that little sign and this little sign and this collection of signs. And learning just for the last 3 weeks, it's been a PhD in copper toxicity. That's one of my nemesis substances I've been poisoned with, and I wasn't aware. I would see the signs and I would feel them, but because I really couldn't do anything about them, I would just end up putting it out of my awareness. And this is what we've had to do because of the scale of suffering. Now, there are those such as yourself who were obviously self-motivated to go and do that learning at some level. People often come to me after they have done a great deal of work and have tried everything. Same with Garrett, right? That they land on his doorstep when all the diets don't work, all the supplements don't work, and all of that kind of thing. But readiness is very real. I love it that you already know, you're not here to save everyone. And to me, that's a very big part of Sacred Purpose, which is part of my platform. That, we all came here for a purpose, and is everybody ready to face the hero's journey of that? The trials and the tribulations and the ordeals and the near-death experiences, or the actual death experiences that come of it. And so that readiness is real, and we're not purposed to save and serve everyone, but there are those that are going to be able to hear our message. Like I can feel the ripple effect of this interview already, Justine, that it's very hopeful that you have this enormous knowledge from the medical side, the science side, the psyop side, and also the inner workings of the inner life and how things actually work despite how we want to feel and believe about them. You're an incredible resource to anybody that was wanting to, go deep and do healing work that otherwise might not be accessible, especially with the context of the biochemistry and the damage that people have been through on medications. So kudos to you, Justine, for the way you've prepared yourself to serve. That's amazing.
Well, thank you so much, Beth. I still feel like it's I wouldn't say the Wild West, but like every day is like I'm not sure what's coming my way, and that's fine. That's where I'm at right now, and we'll see. I mean, you and I know, and for those who are listening, like I am preparing to kind of put forth something that's a little bit more specific and drawing on my experience and my interests and so forth. But right now, I'm meeting people where they're at, and yeah, I'm meeting people who are ready, and I'm meeting people who aren't. But everyone holds the potential, and it's not so much that I'm like holding out the potential for them, but it's like I don't know. I share where I feel like they can hear, and maybe one day, or it's in 2 years, and 5 years, or next month, it clicks. But some people aren't ready.
Yeah. And that's what I've noticed, that the knowledge can come in very like drip like effect, where the vast majority of everything. I've had people go through the Journey Code coaching certification training, and it literally took them 2, 3, 4 years. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh my goodness, I'm getting it. But I didn't get it before. I didn't even know I wasn't getting it before. And it goes deeper, and every day I'm getting it at a new level as well. And I think that's the nature of knowledge, that there should be no bottom to it, where you get to the end and I'm done now. I don't need to learn anymore. I don't need to explore any further. So yeah, that's really good. I'm just wondering if there's anything. Do you want to see? One of the things I was so excited is that you independently went and looked into Garrett Smith's work. Turns out it's not popular among truthers, I'll say. And even though he is one, he didn't drink the Kool-Aid, and he speaks out. He's not. He doesn't believe in the boogeyman viruses, but it's been interesting to approach a number of broadcasters and influencers and those that really stood up for real science when it came to the pandemic. And they researched and they wrote a book this thick. And but now to look into this work, it's like getting a big no. And some people say, oh, I'll go talk to my friends first and then I'll let you know what I think. And it's like, oh, fascinating. What about all the research that you do? So what do you think it was that allowed you to have an open mind to it?
That's a good question. I remember approaching him initially. I wouldn't say with skepticism, but very much like, well, I'll see what he's about. One of the things he does so transparently and so well is, just does his live streams and videos, just referencing a lot of medical literature, and that, that's what I do. So on my own, and so that kind of speaks to me, and I was able to kind of see his thought process displayed on a specific topic. And also, the fact that he, did explain that he's tried different, his own personal path and where he got where he's at. But it also made sense. Fundamentally made sense in the sense of, we all know the liver is all about detoxing our bodies. We all know that, well, maybe we don't all know. In fact, I was like, yeah, what about these bile acids? And when we'd come across some information like bile acids being present in the CSF of people with multiple sclerosis, I was like, what? How's that happening? And so there's a few things that caught my interest there. And so I kind of reserve my own critical judgment, and I would suggest that maybe some of the truther people that you've mentioned it to, like, just haven't put in the time. It takes a little bit of time exposing yourself, keeping an open mind. Might there be something here? I remember mentioning some of this to a couple of physician friends, and they thought it was interesting. I was like, just that example I gave you about multiple sclerosis and bile acids, like what's going on there, and just bile acids in general. It's just not an area that's very much explored in our medical training and our medical backgrounds, but I think it's definitely worth it. And then I mentioned at the beginning, or at one point in the podcast, like, I literally got addicted to carrots, and it's ridiculous to say that, but I can talk about it. It could be I've shared it with you and some others, but it was literally a craving I had. And I actually had a period of brain fog at the peak of that. And I was like, oh, is this like some kind of menopause thing going on? And well, there is a correlation. I quit the carrots, the brain fog got a lot better. So I know it's funny, and it's so there's a little bit of lived experience too, and I think that's also a funny kind of synchronicity, because I got into carrots in the last couple of years for different reasons.
That's great.
But when I was researching different supplements in the past, I also did come across the funny fact that vitamin A, of all the so-called vitamins, was the dangerous one. Just be very careful about the dose of vitamin A. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of curious. All the others seem to be, without kind of, well, I wouldn't say without a limit, but so it kind of correlated with a little bit of info I knew as well. But yeah, no, I like Garrett's way of exposing things, and I just kind of took my critical thinking approach to his information.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm praying for others to do that as well. But I think the gatekeeping is that there's too much at stake. Especially with people who have, you fortunately haven't been broadcasting about natural health and take this supplement and take that substance and stuff like that. So you have the luxury, as I did, to have an open mind.
Yeah.
And I just want the truth. I just want to, this is Charlie Robinson quote, that I don't want to be right. I want to do right.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And possibly could we have that experiment where we have a breakthrough? And then your point also is that I was, even without the science background, I'm hanging on by my fingernails, even just to watch one of those live streams at the beginning, but I could observe it in my own system.
Mm.
And before that, my whole physiology for my entire life has been a mystery that can't be solved, and was just full of the duration paradox of everything working at the start.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, to me, that's just amazing that you have that bandwidth to be able to hear him and to help give it credibility too, because it's one thing for me to say, oh yeah, this is good, but I don't understand the ins and outs. I may never get to that level of being able to independently read a medical paper and and see, like what are the twisted ins and outs where it actually proves that something's toxic, but that's not what they set out to do, and how they couch that in different language and stuff like that. It's all there once you see somebody else point it out. So anyway, I think it's fantastic that you applied your mind there. That well
Yeah,
done.
I mean, I still have a ways to go
Sure.
because yeah, there's a lot there.
There's a lot. The beauty is that, and if we start to close up the interview and back to our topic, the beauty is that it doesn't matter how in depth every condition is, or every different, every condition is different, every body is different. That's still true, but there are some basic principles that can be taken there. And to me, I just think intuitively that this is very hopeful for anybody wanting to either come off medications, or who's already struggling, having come off of them and having poisoned themselves. Maybe it's the jab that they regret getting. I know I've been in some private conversations with people that are terrified of now, is this censorable? I think this whole thing has been so censorable, but the proteins that are like spiky, and so all of these things point back to me what speaks to incredible hope. And our body is wired for detox. It is designed for
Yep.
that. It takes a substance in, it doesn't want to deal with, and it's got ways to bind the protein and to like to take care of it and usher it out. It's just that we are so incredibly toxic over a lifetime that does store. This is another like natural health fallacy, that our livers don't store toxicity. Yes, they store toxicity. I'm very well aware of having, especially the last detox period I just went through, nothing to provoke it. I used to be able to blame, oh, I had the coffee, or I had the chocolate, or I, did this, or I didn't get to sleep, or I was under too much stress. And this was literally so obviously just my liver detoxing a big layer chunk
Mm.
of stuff it couldn't deal with. And so I think that's very hopeful for people that get told that it could be weeks, it could be months, it could be years before you detox. I just have to imagine, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts to add to that this could definitely make it much more successful and easy. And I mean, easy is, got to use that word pretty lightly, because I'm humbled now having watched someone go through it. But do you think that this could contribute a great deal to people who are trying to come off meds?
Mm-hmm. I do think so, and I do recommend it to certain individuals, depending on what they're facing, to to look into Garrett's work, and if they're ready, to go down that path as well. But like I was saying at the beginning, like I don't have like the the experience or the whatever evidence to point to, so to, to say it more, to broadcast that more loudly. But
Yeah.
it does make sense that it would be a helpful add-on. Yeah. Certainly
It's a
from
nice,
overall, just general mental health, yes. But your question is specifically, will it help with the withdrawal? And it seems logical enough. And in some individuals, like the combination of what they're experiencing, yes. And in others, like I like to believe so, but I don't know. Yeah.
and back to readiness, because both like the path of the work that I do and the path of Garrett's is all about self-responsibility. So you can't come in and have that same disposition where it's like, oh, give me your protocol and I'll get fixed. It's
Yeah.
just not like that. It's, all about learning your body and the signs and how to react, because you're not, if a practitioner can't follow you around, and there are no protocols that would actually work. So it's, it comes down to a very precious quality called being able to take responsibility for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And not be the victim in that, even though they've been victimized in that. And my heart goes out to anybody. So yeah, it does help to be humble, Scene Lady. That is a very good quality. Not everyone's always right. We make mistakes, and this might not be the be all and the end all. I can't make that claim, but this has made more sense than anything my entire life. So that part I know, and many people getting results is very hopeful for me as well. That where there's at least testimony to the tune of more than a handful of people, then I don't know. I think it's hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you, Justine, for joining. It is definitely an act of bravery, and I respect that and recognize that. Is there anything that you would want to share with people? How do you work with people as a coach? How might you be combining those two professions, if at all, psychiatry and coaching? And yeah, anything else that you want to share, and how people could reach you if you want them to?
Yeah, well, right now, I guess it's fair enough for me to say, like, I'm not set up as of today to like, let's say, have people contact me and like enter some kind of program, or I'm available like as of next week to help people. I am, if you're Canadian and you're really looking for kind of what I'm up to right now, but what I'm hoping to do. That's why I did want to share my email, and I can kind of like, if those who are interested, collect a list for those. I would like to like create such a program and launch some kind of help in that regard. But there are other resources other than me too. That's why I did mention Dr. Joseph, Dr. Healy, and Dr. Brogan, who are out there doing stuff. And they're not the only ones. So, it is encouraging to see that there is a growing set of voices out there in that regard. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was shocked. I made one little post on Twitter, and then the response was phenomenal. I'm like, wow, that was my most popular post ever. People coming out of the woodwork to say, yeah, we know. And
Because they're so ubiquitously prescribed. That's
exactly,
great. Yes.
exactly. Yeah. So I appreciate you helping to get the word out about this. This satisfies some personal responsibility that came up around that. Just when you witness suffering, you can't just look away. And so that's why we were here today. Yeah. So thank you so much for joining, Justine. And in that special case, you can reach out to her at justine.lalonde@gmail.com. You can also connect with me over on Telegram. There's a King Heroes Journey channel and chat. You can always private message me there if you wanted to connect with Justine in that way, or find out if it would make any sense. I don't mind being a go-between for any communication if you want to check that out. And yeah, I'll just let you know that if you go to bethmartins.com, if you haven't already, you can do a King Hero archetype quiz where in 10 minutes you find out where you are on the path of purpose, learn your archetype, that are one of those deep subjects I still have not got to the bottom of in 20 years or more. So yeah, you're getting lots of appreciation in the chat here. Thank you. And timing is everything, Polly, Vegas. Yeah, indeed. What else was I going to say? So I'm very soon going to be opening up for conversations for the Journey Code Coaching Certification Training that starts in September. It will be the 7th training in 6 years that are happening. And Justine is one of the apprentices there. I've really enjoyed hosting you this last year. It is a wonderful, it's my innermost circle. It's where I have the most connection, where everything is all the, how do you call it? Like, I just show all my cards, or there's an expression like that I just reveal everything in there. There's not that I'm holding back. It's just, again, about readiness and
the inner workings.
the inner workings of everything. Yeah. And the apprentices have become a big shout out to that team, have become a big part of the evolution of this training. And my goal with the training is that there are more people out there who are skilled to help people bring from the unconscious bring things from the unconscious without the chaos that can ensue when it's done without your choice, without your consent, that we end up calling that trauma in our lives, when things happen and all of a sudden the beast comes up that you didn't know was there. And when you are specially trained for this, you have the opportunity to walk with someone through that precipice from unconscious to conscious. And it is a beautiful thing. It is a healing thing. And I've seen people make incredible changes in their life as a result. So watch out for, I'll be sending an email over the next maybe 7 or 10 days, inviting people into a personal conversation with me. There will be some special bonuses that will be available if you sign up early for the training. But it's definitely not too early to put your hands up and let me know that you're interested. So I just want to make sure, get that message out. And I think that's all for today. So thank you very much. By the way, the next interview I'm doing on Thursday, we're going to actually talk about some medications as well with Jeff Brown, author Jeff Brown. I followed for since at least 2012. He's probably one of my older colleagues. We've gone through some iterations. He tried to slam and smash me at the beginning of the pandemic because I didn't want to comply. And he thought that was bad. But then he's since woken himself up and we've reconnected. He's been through a hellish experience with our former First Lady in Canada. And he's just published a book about that. So we're going to learn the ins and outs of maybe some of the behind the scenes political stuff that's going on. And he was also very badly injured by a few medications that he likes to get the word out to people about. So it just happened to fit with the theme of the week here. Mm-hmm. So join us Thursday at 3 p.m. Central Time again for that Back on the King Heroes Journey podcast. And please do help me share this out because it's definitely a shadow banned channel. The other day when I had Hope Tipton on from Garrett's team, there were less views on the video than there were people watching live. So they're obviously, removing views. I know that people all of a sudden they find they are unsubscribed. And so it does help me if you make a comment or you like this video or recommend the channel to any of your friends or anything like that is much appreciated. So I think that's all for now. I'm going to just finally give credit to my son who played the intro music and the outro music that you're about to hear as well. So I will leave you with that. I hope everybody has a beautiful rest of your day and let us know if this was helpful in the chat as well. Thank you, Justine. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much. Lots of love.